In clinical medicine, if one doesn't know what to do, one would be better to do nothing. In the lab, precisely the reverse. If you don't know what to do, you will be better to do something. And that, of course, is because in the lab, nothing will happen without experiments being done. In the clinic, of course, the experiment is being done before your eyes anyway, so you simply wait and observe. So that's a fundamental difference, but there are some fundamental similarities.
It was here in Oxford, a city not far from London and home to one of the most prestigious universities of Europe, that Peter Ratcliffe began his work. Research that has given us a better understanding of the mechanisms which allow cells to sense the level of oxygen availability. Peter Ratcliffe's first interest was in medicine, but after practicing nephrology, he finally turned to cell and molecular biology.
I've always been interested in finding things out in basic science, and I had, I guess, the usual period of research as a young doctor into kidney ischemia. It was, I would say, moderately successful, and I eventually went back to the clinic and had the opportunity to return when I was fully qualified as a clinician and had thought rather more carefully about what exactly I wanted to do. And I was intrigued from my previous research in the way the kidney handled oxygen and how in particular it made a hormone called erythropoietin, and that seemed to me a tractable problem and one that I was enthused to pursue.
Well, Peter has always been a highly effective clinician, and I had seen him before in the context of clinical science. He's a very good doctor. But in addition to that, he'd spent a lot of time working in a laboratory that was focusing on the physiology of the kidney. So he'd spent a lot of time thinking about how a whole organ would work. And in the event, that thinking brought him back to a relatively reductionist problem, and that is, how does erythropoietin get turned on by the lack of oxygen and the hypoxia that's associated with its increased transcription? And it seemed to me that this could potentially emerge as a rather fundamental issue, and it was one where my lab had some of the skills to help answer those questions, but clearly not all of the skills. So it seemed to me a good opportunity to give him a start on his program, which he then has prosecuted so effectively since.
I'm perhaps a rather persistent person. There were certainly errors, many technical errors at the start, as I didn't have a formal training, so I probably poured the world's most expensive agar plates in that I did it badly, and I did it on quite a substantial clinical salary. But again, perhaps because I was a bit older, I knew who to ask, wasn't shy of asking, and I was in a good environment, and we actually had quite a good experimental program, so all in all that worked well and enabled us to get established and do this work on hypoxia biology, which has been fascinating for me for the last 18 years or so.
Have good people working with you. Never hesitate to ask for advice or suggestions. These are some of the principles to which Peter Ratcliffe adhered when commencing his research, and which have led to positive and even decisive results.
He reads widely and he acquires that knowledge with a great depth and precision. He's not afraid of asking other people for their advice and their help, but he picks carefully who he asks and finds people with real expertise. But he's, even at the beginning when we knew nothing about transcriptional biology, to say he wasn't afraid of going to ask world experts is perhaps wrong, but he had the courage to overcome the fear and go and ask them nonetheless. Intensive reading and thought before going to ask to formulate the questions with precision, and a lot of attention to questions that he thought could be answered rather than were just speculative. And then with a certain amount of adrenaline running, go in, ask the questions, come away with the answers and think about them and then go on and act.
Today, Peter Ratcliffe asks a lot of his team. High levels of competence, high standards always, total commitment.
Peter's tough, but he's incredibly fair as well. And you know, I wouldn't still be here if he hadn't been supportive, understanding to what I want to do. So yeah, he's extremely focused, and that's why he's a successful scientist. Peter's quite a pessimist. He doesn't get carried away with results.
What always amazes me about him is that he's able to sort of remain quite emotionally detached, even though he puts a lot of energy and passion into his work. And I think that's really necessary, and I've tried to sort of learn that from him, that you can't be too emotionally attached, otherwise you'll never be objective enough, and you need to be objective. And he's always telling me that the important thing is to come to a position in a project where you can close it and move on to something new, because otherwise you can spend all your time following red herrings, and so you really need to close them and try and move on to something new and exciting.
Looking and finding. Such is the goal of all scientists. With its successes, but also its disappointments, a researcher's life is far from being a bed of roses with a guarantee of making significant discoveries, a reality which his wife Fiona, herself a doctor, well understands and shares with her husband on a day-to-day basis.
He gets very excited about it when he's got good results, and I listen to Pete with a lot of sort of happiness, really, that he's got a good result. But like in all scientific research, you suddenly think you've cracked it, and then several weeks later things aren't going quite so smoothly. So it's very much up and down, and one's sort of emotions go very much up and down over the sort of months and years that he does his research.
Peter Ratcliffe has never given up practicing renal medicine. There was never any question about maintaining these two activities, and he sees certain complementarities between the medical practice and fundamental research.
The two activities go well together in some ways, in that in each circumstance I do diagnostic medicine, acute medicine, where the main problem is diagnosis, and rather as in the lab, one is trying to put something together out of a very nebulous and often disconnected set of facts. So there's a lot of commonality in the type of thinking.
Peter Ratcliffe's research gives us a better understanding of the development of numerous pathologies, such as cancer or cardiovascular and pulmonary diseases. As a doctor and a researcher, Peter Ratcliffe thus maintains a direct link between scientific discoveries and clinical applications.
So I suppose the good things are, you're right, it certainly helps with translational research, so from the bench side to the bedside. And Peter, being a clinician scientist running a big department, can see where those things happen and can help facilitate those. Drawbacks, there are only so many hours in the day, so he's pretty ruthless when it comes to prioritising his workload between the clinic, the research bench and the department as a whole. So you have to be very focused. He's not particularly one for chit-chat, you know, between the 9 to 5 office hours thing, although he works obviously a lot longer than that. So you have to be prepared, you know, and have everything distilled down as finely as possible when you ask him a question. So he's very focused. So when Peter says to you, you've got 2 minutes, he means you've got 2 minutes.
Time is at a premium for Peter Ratcliffe, and his schedule also has to leave time for private life. He's a father of 4 children and manages to find time for his family.
Perhaps I don't find as much time as I could or should, but they're very welcoming, so it's a joy to come back to their house, and I do get back.
Yeah, he's working a lot, but it's doing something he likes, and it's interesting. It's not kind of just writing down, doing tons of paperwork or something like that. It's more kind of active. You're always trying to look for stuff. Or that's how I imagine it, but yeah.
I do a little bit of work from home. It would be wrong to say I help my wife in the garden. That's not true. It's a large garden and largely Fiona's domain, but I enjoy to walk out there and get away from the lab once in a while, yeah.